Welcome to the Business Credit and Financing Show. Each week, we talk about the growth strategies that matter most to entrepreneurs. Listen in as we discuss the secrets to getting credit and money to start and grow your business. And enjoy as we talk with seasoned business owners, coaches, and industry leaders on a variety of topics from advertising and marketing to the nuts and bolts of running a highly successful business. And now, to introduce the host of our show, financial expert and award-winning author, Ty Crandall.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show today. I'm really excited you could join us. Today we have a really cool special guest that's going to dive in and talk to us about what he learned through what I would imagine is probably one of the most scary times of his life, and how it's really helped him become a phenomenal leader and teach people to be phenomenal leaders. So with us today is Dave Sanderson. Now Dave's an inspirational survivor, speaker, and author. His thoughts on leadership have made him an internationally sought-out speaker, because when US Airways Flight 1549, or the Miracle on the Hudson, ditched into the Hudson River on January 15th, 2009, Dave Sanderson knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The last passenger off the back of the plane on that fateful day, he was largely responsible for the well-being and safety of others, risking his own life in frigid water to help other passengers off the plane. Despite the hazards to himself, Sanderson thought only of helping others that emerged from the wreckage with a mission to encourage others to do the right thing. Today he travels the globe sharing his inspirational and motivational leadership message to help people make a difference in how they do business and live their lives. Dave, thanks for coming on with us today.
Ty, thank you for having me today.
Man, I got a lot of things to go over with you today, and I love what you've done with going through this kind of experience and then learning what you've learned about leadership and teaching others. So kudos.
Thank you very much. It's first something it looked like a tragedy at first, but turned out to be an ultimate blessing for me. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Now you used to work, I think, with Oracle, and now you run your own business. Is that right?
That's right. I was in technology sales for 30 plus years. The last stop was about 8 years with Oracle, and then I made the leap to entrepreneurship, and it's been quite a ride.
How long have you been an entrepreneur for?
It'll be 3 years in February 1st, so we're coming up about two plus years right now.
Well, much different than corporate life, right?
Most definitely. It's a lot of learning experiences, as I would say.
So what made you make the jump?
Well, what really inspired me, it really started out when I was head of security for Tony Robbins, and I would travel with him, and one of the responsibilities I'd have is pick him up at the airport or helipad. And every time I would pick him up for an event or something that was going on and I needed to be with him, he'd ask me this question: why are you still working for somebody? When are you going to start working for yourself and start owning your own life? And I tell people, you can always come up with so many excuses till someone calls BS on you, right? There's only so many excuses. So when this happened, the only person that called me in the hospital that night on January 15, 2009 was Tony Robbins. My company didn't call me, but he did. So he and I had a good relationship, very close relationship. But what really triggered that, Tyson, the next day when I go back to Charlotte after the plane crash, I went by my office because candidly, I didn't know if they knew that I was in this plane crash or not. And two of my kids went with me because my wife smartly did not want me to drive home alone. And when I went in, my regional manager's first question he asked is, "You're going to Michigan next week, right?" And my kids are looking at me for the answer, and I said, yes, I would. And that's when I realized, I was exactly the moment I realized, man, I'm just a number here. What Tony's been telling me is right. I've got to get out and do this myself. But I was still making great money, and I got 4 kids to put through college. So it took me a little time to figure out the strategy on how to do it. But that was the moment that I said, you know what, I got to get out. I got to do this on my own because I'm just a number, just big company. Great company. Oracle's a great company. I was just a number.
So what is it that you do now?
Well, now, not only do I speak around the world and not only about the plane crash, but the lessons and strategies from that day, but I've written one book myself. I was a contributor to another book called Brace for Impact. The book I wrote was Moments Matter, but I also do workshops. I'm working with an organization in Atlanta teaching a subject about cultivating leaders with some very well-known people, which I was very honored to be a part of. And, I'm planning on writing another book and hopefully doing another TED Talk here in the next year.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to talk a little bit more about your TED Talk a little bit later on. And you also you mentioned a couple cameos in the movie Sully as well, right?
Yeah, I was very honored to be asked. The way it played out is it was a Monday, and I got a phone call from a producer from the movie Sully and asked me if I could be at the shooting location on Friday at 2 o'clock. And I'm like, yeah, I think I can figure out how to clear my schedule. And cleared it, showed up, and here's Clint Eastwood, and here's like, whoa, this is a big time stuff. And fortunately, about 25 to 30 of us were invited, and we got cameos in the movie as Sully. So I was very honored to be not only associated with that, but got to meet Clint Eastwood and see how a movie's really made and really the telling of the story of the miracle on the Hudson and Sully's life.
Did you feel what you experienced was fairly accurate in the movie from real life?
I think it was pretty accurate. I know they took a couple liberties, and they couldn't recreate 11 degrees and 36-degree water. So other than that, I think it was very accurate.
So let's go there. I mean, because it sounds like where you are now obviously is in large part because of the events that happened that day. And that's kind of what led you into the business you are now of helping others basically become leaders, but it seems like it was quite natural for you that day. So, walk us through the events that actually happened that day as you remember.
So I was one of the first people on the plane because of my status with US Airways. I was a chairman because I traveled so much. Did pay attention to instruction. I did it because I fly 100 plus times a year. It's like I know everything, right? You think you know everything, and then all of a sudden you hear the explosion. You look up and see fire coming out from beneath the wing, and you know something had happened. But it's one of the miracles that happened that day that doesn't get talked about a lot is that impact of the birds hitting the plane happened once. It wasn't a boom boom. It happened the same simultaneous time on both the left engine and the right engine, which made a complete difference on how this whole thing came out. Because if people would have heard multiple, explosions, and they might have thought something different, and people could have panicked. But it was roughly about 6 minutes from moment of takeoff to crashing into the water, and it was a hard hit. He estimates it was somewhere between 100 plus miles an hour as he hit in the river, so it was a hard hit. And I went up in my seat and back in my seat, but then I looked up and saw light coming through the window. So I knew I was alive, but then water started coming immediately because how the plane skidded on the river, basically tore the bottom of the plane out. Someone tried to open up the back door. Water's coming in from back and bottom, so water's filling the plane pretty quickly. So part of the story that doesn't get told a lot. There's really two things that happen. Number one, Captain Sullenberger gets all the credit getting the plane down, but as he said in the movie, which I was really touched when he said it, was total team effort getting people out of that plane. Because he had 155 people had to evacuate a plane that's sinking very rapidly into the water, which was candidly 36 degrees. So you had a lot of obstacles happening at one time. So when it was my time to get out, I didn't. My game plan, Ty, was get to the aisle, get up, and get out. But when I got to the aisle, I heard my mother, who had passed away in 1997, talk in my head, and what I heard her tell me is, "If you do the right thing, God will take care of you." And one of the great things about my mother is she never told us what to do. She made us make a choice. And hopefully our belief systems were of value enough to make the right choice based on her belief system. And I went towards the back of the plane to see if anybody needed help. We got everybody out, started making my way out. And as soon as I started to get out on the right side at 10F, there was no room on the wing or the boat for me. And that's how I became the last passenger out of the plane. And I was in the plane about 7 minutes, waist deep in 36-degree water, holding onto the lifeboat so people from the lifeboat could evacuate from the lifeboat to the wing.
Wow, that's astonishing. Now, you fly all the time. So when that moment of impact occurred, where were you sitting on the plane? Where were you sitting?
Yeah, I was in seat 15A. I was 4 rows behind the left wing. So I had bird's eye view, not to be a pundit, but a bird's eye view of what was going on the left side of the plane and the engine.
So as much as you fly, when that impact occurred and the fire came out, you more than likely knew exactly what had happened, that they'd blown an engine, right?
Yeah, I knew they blew an engine, but like I mentioned, I knew, so I flew so often, you have 2 engines on the plane minimum. So I thought we had the other engine. He was going back to LaGuardia.
Yeah,
And the
so
other people on the other side thought the same thing.
so then did you figure that out in the air? I mean, when you saw the one happen, how long or after before you realized that the other engine was out as well?
It wasn't until he said his words, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And once he said that, then I used the word serious. And when I've been on media interviews, the captain uses the word dire, and I'll use his term because he's the captain. But that's when I knew that this was not good, because he was heading, as soon as he cleared the bridge, and he only cleared the bridge roughly by 400 feet. The bridge is 600 feet up. So at that point of descension, he was around, I think, between 900 and 1,000 feet. So as I looked out the window, looking down over the George Washington Bridge, you could see people's faces looking up at you as you're crossing over, and you knew that you were going down pretty fast.
Did you know where you were landing?
Yeah, once he crossed the bridge, there was no doubt that we were going to crash into the river. And I'll use the word crash, and he's used the word crash. I know Captain Skiles uses the word water landing. And yes, technically, I guess it was, but man, when you're hitting 100 plus miles an hour, that's more of a crash than a landing to me.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that is absolutely the proper definition is a crash from
Yeah,
everything I
yeah,
understand, of aviation. So the one engine blew, you knew there was a problem. You thought that the other engine was okay. And it seems like, from what I understand, everybody was fairly calm through this because I think a lot of people had that belief. Probably people on one side of the
exactly.
plane kind of thought you guys were okay. You were just going to turn around with a blown engine and land. People really didn't start to realize what was happening and that there was going to be a crash until he made that announcement.
And once he made the announcements, when immediately the flight attendant said brace, 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 and then you knew that, excuse my language, all stuff was breaking loose.
Yeah, so then you knew, and then everybody obviously took action. There doesn't seem like there was a lot of panic at the time, and then probably, less than a minute later, you were on the water.
Yeah, it was, he estimates between 60 and 70 seconds, exactly right.
So about a minute later, you're on the
Yeah.
water, and then that's when, everything else ensues. Just the water starts coming in. Everybody sees the water rising, but even then, it doesn't sound like there was a huge amount of panic.
Now, the term I used in my first interview with Katie Couric was controlled chaos, where people are moving really fast. There's no one standing around, but no one's pushing each other, no one's jumping over each other, nothing like that is happening. It was controlled, but it was people were moving hard and fast.
So now so it was that voice in your head that really made you do the right thing, and is what you're describing. And basically, instead of walking out the door, which was closest to you, you turned around and went the opposite way all the way to the back to get people then to filter through the front because they couldn't go out the back then, right?
That's right. Once someone tried to open up that back door, that's why the water started coming in. So Doreen, the flight attendant in the back, who injured her legs, got that door so almost closed, and when then she cut her leg and made her way out. So when I went to the back, see, my thought process was I knew I was alive, but I didn't know anybody in the back was. So when I went towards the back, I saw people coming forward over the seats and up through the aisle, and I was like scooting through them. And I got to the back, and what happened was, is one elderly lady, and you may have seen her if you saw the movie Sully, who the lady who played her didn't want to really go that fast. She wanted, and it's like people were like, let's go, let's go. So I got behind them, and actually it was two ladies sort of picked her up and started moving her, and I started walking behind them to make sure we could move fast. And that's how it happened in the back of the plane.
Yeah, and then just like in the movie and from what we saw on TV, people actually went all the way to the edge of the plane, and I think some of them actually jumped in the water,
That's correct.
right? And then others, it looks like the raft then came in and everybody filled. So the raft was full, the wing was full, and then you were still kind of stuck in the plane. And
Yep.
the temperature was what did you say? It was like 11 degrees, right?
It was 11 degrees that day, yeah. And I didn't know I was the last passenger out until there was a picture when I was interviewed on Good Morning America a couple of weeks later. They had a picture of me hanging out of the plane, holding on to the lifeboat, and that's when I realized and found out that I was the last passenger out, and that's why, I was waist deep in 36-degree water for about 7 minutes.
From that point, and even as cold as it doesn't seem like there was a lot of panic. I mean, did you guys see the other boats coming your way?
Yeah, I was on the right side of the plane, and yeah, boats were definitely coming. People weren't panicking still. They were anxious, but no one, once again, was pushing anybody out of the way. They were just anxious to get, where's the boat and how am I going to get on that boat? You know?
So did you have any training, an experience that kind of helped you do and allowed you to do what you did that day? Did you have leadership training at Oracle, for example, or previously in your life that beyond just that voice really taught you to stay controlled and to take action?
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually wasn't at Oracle or any of the previous positions I was in. I really got that training when I started going to the Tony Robbins events and then eventually became the head of security, because one of the reasons I got to be on the team is because I started learning and mastering the things that he taught, and many of those things that he taught that I used that day, such as state management, how to control your mind, to be able to get an outcome. And I used state management that day to be able to control how I reacted. I used another strategy that I learned around sensory acuity by being able to communicate in different modalities. And I used that when there was a lady in the middle of the wing that wasn't moving, and I had to sort of get her attention, and she was in no state to be able to, she wasn't listening until I yelled, throw the baby. And I knew by yelling something radical to her, I would get her attention. And when I got her attention is when she looked at me, and another lady picked up on it and got the baby from her. And that's how people started walking down the wing. So the things that I learned by being around Tony and the strategies that he teaches, and it's not new stuff. But one thing I did is I mastered it, I'm able to use it, and I use that in my sales, Ty, which helped me dramatically in my business. Being able to, speak in different modalities, audio, kinesthetic, or visual modalities, and breaking people patterns. So I use those strategies, and all those strategies are about how leaders step up. And I show a picture when I speak about on the right side of the plane where I went out, there was no crew on the right side of the plane. All the crew went out the left side of the plane. So the people on the right side of the plane, leaders had to step up and who had no training. What passenger trains for a plane crash?
Sure.
It just doesn't happen. So leaders stepped up, and leadership comes not from the skills that you learn. This is what you do in this situation. It's having certainty in the most uncertain times. And that's a distinction that I tell people. And that's when leaders step up, and you can find out who the person who's going to be a leader in any situation is the person who gives the most certainty in the most uncertain times.
What's interesting is, I'm a military veteran, and I have a lot of friends that went into the war zone, which I didn't, and, God bless all of our soldiers that fight for us overseas. And a lot of them come back with PTSD, and I see that with a lot of people that go through traumatic events. This was by far a very traumatic event. It was almost multiple traumatic events, right? Because you had the realization of the plane crash, the actual crash, the getting out of that, you're out of the plane, then you have to worry about how to get from where you are to land. So, did you experience PTSD? Because it almost seems like you experienced growth through this, which is, the opposite, really, of what PTSD is. So speak to that a little bit, if you don't mind.
I appreciate you bringing it up because that's what my TED Talk, is all about. And one thing I realized, people kept telling me, Ty, that I'd have depression, that I would need therapy. And US Airways did a tremendous job. They offered therapy to everybody, and a lot of people got it. And if you saw the movie Sully, that Sully was going through PTSD, when he was going through what he had to go through. But I didn't, and I kept asking the question back, why? Why not me and them? And all of a sudden I started figuring out, the strategies that I used to be able to grow from this traumatic event instead of going to a depressed state. Because there were people on the plane, the passengers, who lost their jobs, lost their marriages, were angry, bitter. Give you another example. The lady I talked about who was standing in the middle of the wing that day, she's never flown in a plane again. She's definitely scared to be on a plane. So, she went through her own depression, but I didn't. But I started figuring out why I didn't. And all of a sudden, I put these pieces of the pie together. It's like, this is how I can help people who've gone through a traumatic life event, whether it's a plane crash, military. I do a lot now with especially sheriffs and police and law enforcement, what they're going through. I talked to a lady who was in that earthquake or that over there in Nepal where they had like 20-some people die, and she was one of the survivors, and she's having survivor's guilt. So I get to talk to people and share these strategies so they can at least have an opportunity to get out of that depressed state and go into a growth state.
Do you have any PTSD from it? I mean, do loud, sounds or anything, does any of that adversely affect you? Or are these things that you've learned, which now you teach others, were you really able to control your state to a point where you just did not have any of those side effects?
That's a great question, distinction, because I think there's one thing that still happens, and I would say that I've gotten through probably a lot of it because I haven't had to realize it. But when I see somebody who has accomplished something out of a tragedy, I get emotional because you see that all the time. Whether somebody coming back from the war with no legs and all of a sudden they're doing something outstanding, I really get emotional because I understand what it takes to do that, and I have an appreciation for that. So other than that, I think I'm pretty good on all these things, and I've talked to Captain Sullenberger and Captain Skiles. I understand where they were coming from and some things, what they were going through, and I went through some of the same things, but never to the extent that a lot of people did.
How are those guys in person?
You know what? Solid guys. Jeff Scout is one of the funniest guys you ever want to meet. He has such a dry sense of humor. He and I spoke together in Chattanooga, and we had a 2 hour talk, which was a tremendous talk. We had about 400 people there. They got to hear the entire story, and got to learn a lot of things from Jeff. A great guy. And Captain Sullenberger and I spoke together last year at Illinois State University to about 1,000 people. And we spent some time together. And what was interesting about that, Taj, he got there before I did because I had a speaking engagement in Memphis, Tennessee that morning, and I had to be at Southern Illinois University that evening by 5 o'clock for the event. And I was just busting it trying to get there. I don't have a private plane like some people do to get to places. But when I pulled up, the first person to come greet me was him. He came right to my car, opened the car door, gave me a hug, and it was like a connection that we have something in common. And plus, we both knew we both share the same birthday. So every birthday we get together on the phone to talk, and which is a very nice thing to be able to do. But it's a solid guy. And when I tell people about Captain Sullenberger, it's black and white, guys. It ain't no gray. If you're wanting to be feeling politically correct or feel good about it, he's just going to tell you what it is. And I really respect that about him.
So what are the biggest? What are some of the biggest self-realizations that you kind of experienced from that day?
Number one, that if you focus your mind, you can survive anything. And one of the reasons I tell you that is when I was in that water for so long, and you talk to EMTs, and they kept always saying, I can't understand how you can survive that water, being in the water for 7 or 8 minutes. How can you do that? It's because you focus your mind on the outcome instead of what's really going on internally. So, and I learned this from being around Tony. Is the power of disassociation. And I saw how he used this and with some other people, some very well-known people, when they were going through challenges that I knew he wanted to connect with, but he had to disassociate, just like Captain Sullenberger had to disassociate his emotions to get the plane down. So one of the key distinctions I learned that day is the power of disassociation and being able to do that in times of chaos and or crisis or in challenging times.
How does somebody learn how to do that?
Well, I think you got to go through a lot of circumstances, but I also tell people one of the best ways to do that is the meaning you attach to it. And that's what I learned from Tony. And this is not new rocket science. But I learned this in being around Tony and then practicing it is the meaning you attach to something produces the emotion of your life. And so if you attach a meaning to it, like, oh my goodness, I'm suffering, I'm cold, then you're going to be cold. That's the meaning you attach to it. So that's what you're going to get. If you attach the meaning that I got to get this outcome, all of a sudden your mind starts figuring out how to get the outcome instead of I'm cold. And it's like Sullenberger did. And I give the example in my TED talk about how Captain Sullenberger did it that day was the power of focus. He focused on the outcome. He didn't focus on all the other things going around, like, oh my God, if people die, they're going to get hurt. It's like, what's the outcome, right? And I learned that as part of being a leader, you got to be able to disassociate and focus on the true meaning, what it is. It's not better than it is, not worse than it is. It is what it is, and handle what it is. And that's the way I learned how to disassociate.
It's interesting because when you talked about going into work, you mentioned that you had two of your children there. I mean, what are some of the things that you really learned to appreciate in life that you probably took for granted or didn't realize how much you appreciated it until that happened?
I think what I didn't appreciate as much has changed dramatically since is my prioritizing of time. And the reason I say that is I was driven, I was an achiever, I was a top producer, right? And I started looking back as I started following the model of my father, and my father was a great guy. But my father did the same thing when I was growing up. He was out doing what he had to do, right? You provided for your family. That was the mindset of the World War II generation, right? You provided. And you had to do what you had to do to provide. And I want my kids to have a better life than I did. So he was never home. He was gone 3, 4 nights a week. So my mother was the strong one in the house. Well, it sort of came the same way with me because I was out all the time, working, making a lot of money, thinking that's the way I provide for my family. When I started realizing what my family really wanted is my time. And so because I was missing a lot of activities at school, especially school activities with my kids, I had to rearrange my thought process. So you know what? Now I schedule my time around my family events. So if, like, for example, if you want to do this interview tonight at 6 o'clock and my kids and I are going to be going out to a ball game, we ain't doing this call at 6 o'clock tonight. My family's time comes first, which has changed my relationship with everybody in my family.
How did your wife react to everything? Did she see the play? Did she see it on TV as it was happening and realize it
No,
was you?
she was actually dropping our son off for basketball practice at our church. So my daughter is the one who got the message because I called, left a message on the voicemail because someone had a phone on the ferry, put it up to my mouth. He dialed the phone for me, and all I could get out is, "This is your dad. I've been in a plane crash." And my daughter communicated that to my wife. So by the time my wife got home from getting all the other kids, getting them home, and we had 3 TV stations sitting on our lawn, is my understanding, waiting to interview her, and she knew nothing about what was going on. So she had a real challenging experience that evening.
So, I mean, it must have been a roller coaster of emotion from hearing that kind of message secondhand from your daughter to, then not even knowing what happened herself. So, did she end up getting most of the details from TV, or was she able to talk to you before she got a lot of the details?
No. She saw me. I was on CBS with Katie Couric, so she saw that I was alive. She heard my voice because they didn't put me on screen because I was in ICU. So she heard my voice, but then I didn't talk to her about midnight that night because I had no phone. I had nothing. And until I could actually, they warmed my body up, which took 5 hours, they wouldn't let me do anything except interviews sitting there in the bed. So I didn't talk to her until midnight, started telling her what happened, and then sort of told her what she needed to do to make sure that she could get to the airport the next day because I didn't know whether I was going to be able to drive or not.
So, you help business owners, you help a lot of people now with leadership, but what are some of the biggest lessons that this really taught you that you now apply to your business to help others?
One of the things I really apply right now is how, and the question I kept asking myself, and it was just changed my business dramatically, Ty, is how can I add value to others instead of and enjoy the process? And the reason I say that is I was driven on significance. It was more about me initially. But since I started shifting that process to how can I add value to other people, it comes back tenfold. So I say one of the biggest lessons I learned from that day, because it happened that day on the plane, is adding value to other people is much more important, and that's where you get to not only the true joy, but that's where your true feelings of success come from. So number one in business, I tell people, try to teach them, focus on adding value to other people, but most importantly, enjoy the process. And I use the example, Ty, of people who go to work every day where they're adding value, but they hate their jobs. I
Yeah.
mean, I hated my job, but you know what? I was making Larry Ellison millions of dollars a year, but I hated my job. So I was adding value, but not enjoying the process. So that enjoying the process is the piece where a lot of people forget. So that's why I try to teach and tell people, do something that you can enjoy doing, because all of a sudden that's when you start adding more value and take the personal significance off of yourself.
So, what do you think the key is for someone to develop the inner hero, like you were able to do?
I think it's a mindset. I think it's a focus on, I'm here to serve. And I think that came from Tony. It didn't come from Oracle. It didn't come from PeopleSoft or other companies I worked for. It came from, being a part of his security team. I was focused on 2 things. Of course, making sure he was taken care of, but 3 things. Serving, right? And whatever he needed, serving people. But the third thing was probably one of the biggest lessons I learned from him, and helped me tremendously in business. And I try to teach people when I talk about it in my book Moments Matter, is the skill of anticipation. And one thing he taught me and told me was what he values most on the team members he has on his team are the ability to anticipate the next move. And I had that skill on how to anticipate. I could see what was going to happen, seconds or ahead of time of most people. And that's how I got promoted to that level with Tony, because I could anticipate. And so being able to anticipate in business, especially right now, sort of seeing 2 or 3 steps down the road and being able to figure out what's going to happen, is a skill set that people will pay for. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. But people at Tony's level, those CEO level people, those executives, those generals, if you can anticipate and give them that strategies and understanding of what they should be thinking about next, that's adding a significant value to somebody.
So, how was it? How was your experience working with Tony?
He's a genuine as a person I've ever been around. And plus, the one thing I learned about him, the term he doesn't get associated enough with him, is congruence. What you see, you may see the persona out on TV. That's pretty much what you get. And I think one of the greatest things that he did was that movie, I Am Not Your Guru, because people got to see the authentic Tony, how it really is. And there's no BS. So I enjoyed my time at I'm still friends with Mr. Robbins. I don't see him as much as I used to. But, he was the only one that called me in the hospital that night. And I tell people, yeah, he's got the resources to figure it out. Yeah, he's got a lot of people, a lot of ways to do it. But he still took the time to call me, which told me that I was important to him. And that meant a lot to me.
You've touched on several of them, but I mean, what are some of the other biggest lessons you've learned from him? Because it sounds like a lot of how you were able to manage this day came from lessons that you learned by following him.
Yeah, by being around him, I think, and I tell people, not only being around him, but the people he hung with. And that was as a value as being around Tony, because as you know, if you're in the military and you're dealing with a lot of people, right? You know, these people hang around some very significant people. One of the people is actually president of the United States right now, and I got to meet him, by being around Tony and seeing Tony coach that person on how to really get your message out in a way that's coming from the heart instead of off a piece of paper or a teleprompter. So being able to be around the people he was also around and his leadership team and the people he hung with, it was immensely valuable to me because it added different perspectives and dimensions on how I could think about things. And Kaylee, I think I'm much more open thinker now. And one of the things I wrote about in my blog is about worldview. And that's what changed the most for me after the plane crash is, I was pretty fixed on the way I thought about things, Ty, and I was probably pretty judgmental. But all of a sudden I started realizing I had no business being judgmental of people because I didn't understand people's backstories or where they came from. And that came from being on the plane and realizing some things that I made judgments about people. And all of a sudden I started talking to them like, well, now I understand, right? And all of a sudden my worldview started to change by a lot of things. So now being less judgmental has been able to give me a direction to talk to people that has been much more valuable and open to people, and I would never even speak to right now. We've spoken to before.
So, what made you decide to go from taking this experience and then decide to basically ultimately go in your business and use it to help others?
Well, it wasn't my game plan originally. Yeah, I was still going to go back to work and making a lot of money doing what I did, selling technology for Oracle. But like I mentioned, when I started realizing I'm making all this money for somebody else, I could add value and enjoy the process doing it myself. But I had no background on how to do it. So I took a leap of faith and I burned the boats at the bridge, right? There's no going back. And once you do that, you have to figure things out, and you have a lot of learning experiences, which, as we talked about before, I had a lot of learning experiences. But it was really, that point where it's like, I'm spending all this time, I've spent 50 years of my time making money for all these other people, where candidly, I'm pretty good at what I do. And now, not only do I have a platform, but I have a way to be able to share it on a level that very few people get. And so everybody on that plane had the same opportunity, but I took the pathway that was opened up to me. And I tell people sometimes if you don't take the pathway, they may never open up to you again. So you have that opportunity to take it and run and play it out.
Do you keep in touch with or kind of follow a lot of the other passengers and where they are now?
Well, we have a Yahoo group so I follow them, what's sort of going on. But I know pretty much everybody who went out the right side of the plane because that's the side of the plane that I went out. And I know the gentleman who's in the hospital with me better than anybody else. His name is Barry Leonard. If you saw the movie, he's the gentleman who played him is the one who jumped out the right door right into the water initially. Right. The flight attendant told me that was him, and he was in the hospital with me. So we were the only two people that stayed the night in the hospital there in New Jersey. And he actually lives about a mile and a half from where I live. So we were actually neighbors. We didn't even know it. But, I stay more in touch with Captain Sullenberger because we're both out on the road a lot, and we share the same birthday. So I see him as I pass him in the airports and see him. And of course, the movie brought us all back together again. But it's pretty much people on the right side of the plane, or they ended up in New Jersey.
So, are you surprised at all how some of them turned out, whereas some of them still had that PTSD and lifelong fears? Well, there have to be others like you that then used it as a big growth experience and then, went on to change dramatically things in their life. Do any of the things surprise you of the outcomes of the people that were on there with you?
That's a great question. Yes, they do. I know of one person that's usually said that, who we were on the early show together, and he made a statement in front of everybody that he never wanted to see us again, never wanted to talk to us again. And of course, we're all like judging why. It's like, well, he lost his job, he got divorced, he went in such a PTSD spiral, and he didn't reach out for anybody's help. So yeah, that surprised me because there were so many other people. And as I talk about references, right? And you have references and virtual references that you can tap into that candidly before all the internet and everything, you could even tap into these kind of people. But now there's a lot of reasons why, if you have a challenge, you can find somebody who's had a similar challenge and they can help you through it. And he had 150 plus other people who could help him, and he didn't. And I don't know where he's at now, but I hope he's doing well.
So if you look back at this, I mean, how would you best describe how this moment really, really changed your life?
I would say it gave me a totally new perspective and it gave me confidence that, when there's a challenging time, if I control my mind and disassociate the emotions, I can handle anything. Because as I tell people, Ty, everybody in this life, you, me, everybody who's listening right now will have what I call a personal plane crash in your life. Something's going to happen. No one goes through life unscathed. Whether it's a car wreck or whether you have a death in the family, a health scare, something's going to happen. And it's like, how are you going to respond and handle it when something does happen to you? Are you going to go into that death spiral, or are you going to be able to reach out and look at other people who survived and thrived and grown, and be able to tap into that so you too can get that same outcome? And that's probably the biggest thing I've learned, and one of my biggest mission now is to teach people or tell people, you're not in this thing alone. If you're in that spiral right now, seek out and model people who get the outcome you want, and you too will be able to achieve that outcome.
So what about, you talk a lot about leadership. Of this experience, what are some of the biggest things you've picked up that you pass on to help other people become good leaders?
Well, I'll share two quick stories. Number one, I had the honor and privilege of escorting a gentleman named General Norman Schwarzkopf, who, as you know, lived in Tampa and was the general who was in charge of the Iraq War. And I got to escort him in 1999. And as I was with him, I asked him if I could ask him a question. And he sort of looked at me and said, "You're really asking? You just want to know, or you really want, asking a question?" I said, "I really want to ask a question." I asked a question. The question I asked him was, "How did you win that war in Iraq so quick?" And he gave me his pat answer. And I tell people, everybody's got a pat answer. After about 5,000 times, you get pretty good at the answer, right? But then I said, "Can I ask you another question?" He looked at me and said, "No one ever asked a general a second question." And he said, "Go ahead." I said, "How did you really win it?" He sort of looked at me like, this kid's audacious, right? No one ever asked me that, right? He said, "I'll tell you how I won this thing." And it was just like right in my face. He goes, "Every day people would come into the theater. I'd come into the theater. They say the women had to cover their heads. The people had to pray 5 times a day. Women couldn't drive tanks in Saudi Arabia." And I kept reminding my troops, "How does this contribute to kicking Saddam out of Kuwait?" He said, "Every day, that's all I would do every day to my management team and my leaders. How does this?" And all of a sudden I started realizing, he was focused on the mission. That was his mission. His mission wasn't going into Baghdad to go get Saddam. His mission was kicking Saddam out of Kuwait. So then I tell people, fast forward 10 years when I was with Captain Sullenberger on the early show, we were in the green room, and I hadn't talked to the guy before. We were on all these shows, but you go in 15 different directions, right? And he's the star, and you're the backup band, right? So I went up to him at the early show in the green room. I said, "Captain, you got to tell me something, man. How did you pull this thing off?" And he looked at me and said, "I had a mission, 0 fatalities." That's all he said. And I said, "You know what? That makes sense." And all of a sudden I started putting two together. I said, I heard the same message from Schwarzkopf about the mission. So I teach people now and show people it's all about developing the mission and ingraining the mission and checking your ego at the door, so letting people execute the mission, course correct when you have to, but setting the mission. The second thing I learned and I teach is something that comes from the Bible. And I think anything you want to learn, you can actually, there's lessons in the Bible. It's about how Jesus taught leadership to his disciples and about when he fed the 4,000 people. And people think that's a miracle, right? You have a couple pieces of fish, a couple pieces of bread, and all of a sudden 4,000 people are getting fed. It wasn't about that. That whole lesson I got from it was Jesus was teaching the disciples the strategy on how to solve a problem and lead people in times of crisis. And he breaks it down. He goes out how he does it, right? Identifies the problem. He gets his team together. He brings them a solution. Here's the answer. Execute. Because he knew that in a short time that those disciples were going to go around the world and have to lead themselves, and they're not going to have him with them. So I tell people, there's lessons. I talk about references and virtual references. I have a strong reference for leadership firsthand. I've got virtual references by looking at materials like the Bible. I said, that's why I teach about leadership. If you want to figure it out, there's a lot of ways to do it. And I just share people those lessons.
Dave, I appreciate you coming on with me today. This has been a really inspirational and informative interview.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to do it with you, Todd.
So where can all of our listeners go to learn more about you, to learn more about your experience, to learn more about, the services that you offer and how you can help them take the lessons that you've learned to become better leaders in their life?
I appreciate that. So I think the first way to do is go to my website at davesandersonspeaks.com. You can tap into any of the resources that I have, whether it's the books, courses, the speaking, whatever that may be. But then if you want to sort of get an ongoing dialogue, Facebook is Dave Sanderson Speaks. Check me out there. Friend me there, and I update that on a daily basis. And LinkedIn's been tremendous lately under David Sanderson. That's where I give me these business tips around how they relate, what happened on the plane related to business. And then Twitter is Dave Sanderson too, and those are those daily quips. And my kids have actually got me on a thing called Instagram now. So check me out on Instagram, and I'm trying to figure that one out. But but we're going to good at that. But I also like to offer your folks, if they want to check some more of my materials out in detail, they just text 797979 and the keyword brace for the number 4 impact. I'll send them a quick little video on one of the topics we talked about around state management and how to manage your mind when all stuff's hitting the fan. That's my gift to them.
Did you say that was 797979?
It's text 797979, keyword brace, the number 4 impact. And if they do that, they'll be getting some free videos from me.
And I really appreciate you doing that, and I know our listeners do too.
Thank you very much. I'd be honored to do it.
Well, look, you're an amazing man. I mean, it's astonishing what you went through and what you've been able to learn. And like I said, kudos to how you've applied this to your life and in using what you went through in that experience to help others. That's just a miraculous thing.
Well, Ty, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing to get these messages out so people can hear there are ways to learn and grow from all these different experiences people have.
So listen, everybody, I'm going to put these resources on. I appreciate that, by the way. Thank you. I'm going to put these resources on our show notes page. Make sure that you visit davesandersonspeaks.com. And I'll put links to the other social media pages on there that you don't forget to text BRACE for Impact. That's BRACE, the number 4, Impact, to 797979 to take advantage of those free videos that are available. Remember, hopefully this touched you the way it touched me, and it doesn't mean anything unless you take action on it. Make sure you text 797979, the word brace for impact. Make sure you visit davesandersonspeaks.com and look into this a little bit more, because you're able to work with Dave and his team one-on-one and actually get the benefit of everything he went through and the lessons he's learned working with Tony and going through this experience. Apply it to your life and your business to have the same kind of impact that he's had. So very special thanks again, Dave, for coming on with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
And thanks everybody for listening. Make sure that you text BRACE for Impact to 797979 to grab your free resources, and make sure you check out the show resources page for the other links where you can follow Dave at his website and social media pages. Thanks everybody.
You've been listening to the Business Credit and Financing Show with your host, Ty Crandall. Watch for our next episode to get even more insight on financing and growing your business. And don't forget to check us out online at creditsuite.com for even more business growth strategies.